Nitai. Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Baladeva Jaya Subhadra. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Ita Go Premanandi. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajagacharya Stotra Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Abhay Charan Ravinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajagacharya Stotra Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananda Koti Vaishnav Vrind Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki प्रेम तको श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री द्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद की श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की वृंदावन धाम की मथुरा धाम की जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की मायापुर धाम की गंगा माई की यमुना माई की तुलसी देवी की भक्ति देवी की श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन यज्ञ की Srila Prabhupada Transcendental Book Distribution Ki Shri Gaur Premanandi. All glory to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glory to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glory to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glory to Shri Guru and Shri Guru Angana Krishna. Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone to this morning's Srimad Bhagavatam class. We are reading from Canto 3, Chapter 23, titled Devahuti's Lamentation, verse number 39. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vyasudevaya. Okay, Canto 3, Chapter 23, verse number 39. Tenashtaloka Vihara Chalendra Droneshu Angasakamaruta Sobhagashu Siddhenutu Dyudhuni Patasiva Svanashu Reme Chiram Dhanadava Lalanavaruti Tenashtaloka Vihara Kula Chalendra Droneshu Ananga Sakamaruta Sobhagashu Siddhenuto Dyudhuni Patashiva Svanashu Reme Chiram Dhanadavalalana Varutihi Tenashtaloka Vihara Kula Chalendra Droneshu Ananga Sakha Maruta Sobhagashu Siddhe nuto didhu nipata shiva svanashu. Reme chiram dhanadava lalana varutihi. Word for word translation. Tena, by that airplane. Ashtalokapa, of the predominating deities of the 8 heavenly planets. Vihara, the pleasure grounds. Kula Achala Indra, of the king of the mountains Meru. Dronishu, in the valleys. Ananga, of passion. Sakha, the companions. Marut, with breezes. Marutaha, with breezes. Sobhagashu, beautiful. Siddhe, by the Siddhas. Nutaha, being praised. Dyudhuni, of the Ganges. Pata, of the downfall. Shiva Swanasuhu, vibrating with auspicious sounds. Reme, he enjoyed. Chiram, for a long time. Dhanadavat, like Kuvera. Lalana, by damsels. Varutihi, surrounded. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. Translation. In that aerial mansion, he traveled to the pleasure valleys of Mount Meru, which were rendered all the more beautiful by cool, gentle, fragrant breezes that stimulated passion. In these valleys, the treasure of the gods, Kuvera, surrounded by beautiful women and praised by the Siddhas, generally enjoys pleasure. Kardama Muni also, surrounded by the beautiful damsels and his wife, went there and enjoyed for many, many years. Purport. Kuvera is one of the 8 demigods who are in charge of different directions of the universe. It is said that Indra is in charge of the eastern side of the universe, where the heavenly planet or paradise is situated. Similarly, Agni is in charge of the southeastern portion of the universe. Yama, the demigod who punishes sinners, is in charge of the southern portion. Nirti is in charge of the southwestern part of the universe. Varuna, the demigod in charge of the waters, is in charge of the western portion. Vayu, who controls the air and who has wings to travel in the air, is in charge of the northwestern part of the universe. And Kuvera, the treasurer of the demigods, is in charge of the northern part of the universe. All these demigods take pleasure in the valleys of Mount Meru, which is situated somewhere between the sun and the earth. In the aerial mansion, Kardamamuni traveled throughout the 8 directions, controlled by the different demigods described above. And as the demigods go to Mount Meru, he also went there to enjoy life. When one is surrounded by young, beautiful girls, sex stimulation naturally becomes prominent. Kardamamuni was sexually stimulated, and he enjoyed his wife for many, many years in that part of Mount Meru. But his sex indulgence was praised by many, many siddhas, beings who have attained perfection, because it was intended to produce good progeny for the good of universal affairs. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatirubhascha Kripa Sindhu Vaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna. I'll read the verse again. Canto 3, chapter 23, verse number 39. In that aerial mansion, he traveled to the pleasure valleys of Mount Meru, which were rendered all the more beautiful by cool, gentle, fragrant breezes that stimulated passion. In these valleys, the treasure of the gods, Kuvera, surrounded by beautiful women, and praised by the siddhas, generally enjoys pleasure. Kardamamuni, also surrounded by the beautiful damsels and his wife, went there and enjoyed for many, many years. So, contrary so far to what the chapter is titled, Devahuti's Lamentation, and here we see, especially in this verse, as we read it word for word, Kardamamuni seems to be enjoying with his beautiful wife. Now, just to understand the context and the sequence of events that have happened so far, just last week, last Saturday, I believe Chaitanya Charan Prabhu was speaking, and he said this whole pastime is, you know, quite perplexing in many, if you look at it from different perspectives. Devahuti is actually the daughter of Swayambhuva Manu. And Swayambhuva Manu, as we understand, in a day of Brahma, there are 14 Manus. So, and Swayambhuva Manu is the first Manu that actually comes, that is taking on the service. So, the domain of the Brahma, as we see, is basically the first created being in this universe, and to manage affairs, there are 14 in one day of Brahma. There are 14 Manus. Similarly, if you multiply that times 30 days times 365 days, and that he lives for 100 years. So there's always a change of different personalities taking up the service. And Swayambhuva Manu, so his sovereignty is basically extends to whatever Brahma is, So the 14 planetary systems that actually Brahma is overseeing, that actually is being managed by Swayambhuva Manu. And Devahuti is actually his daughter. And Prabhu was explaining that usually we'll see that, especially we see in common folklore or in movies, we see that, the boy and the girl, they unite, and then usually, it always has to be amongst equals. In one case, we see that the girl has come from a wealthy background, and the boy is, from not so wealthy background, and usually the father of the girl has some opposition to the whole, alliance. But here we see that Swayambhuva Manu himself is presenting his daughter to Kardama Muni on the basis of his spiritual advancement. So fast forward that, obviously, Devahuti serves Kardama Muni faithfully because of his advancement in Krishna consciousness, in his spiritual practices, his austerity. And based on that, as a result of that, she has neglected her own personal self. And when Kardama Muni sees it, he feels some sort of affection, compassion for her, and then he bestows her with, he makes all these arrangements, and within no time, there's basically an aerial mansion, and the description that was preceding this describes what was in that mansion. And, by the dint of his yogic power, he's able to provide for his wife. And here we see that he's been given a service. If we just look back a couple of chapters previously, he's been asked by Lord Brahma to create progeny. So, obviously, there are many perspectives to look at it, and obviously we need to look at the context before jumping to a conclusion here. Just 2 days ago, Ganesham Prabhu was speaking on this chapter, and 2 verses prior to this, and he was saying that, and in fact, if you read this purport, you will see towards the end, but his sex indulgence was praised by many, many siddhas, beings who have attained perfection, because it was intended to produce good progeny for the good of universal affairs. So in the Bhagavatam, we find many other stories. The story of King Yayati, and the story of, there are many others, but Pururava. And King Yayati, in fact, it is described in the 9th canto that he was cursed by Sukracharya because it seemed to be that he was having an intimate relationship with someone that was not his wife. So he was cursed by Sukracharya as a result of that, he basically had to give up his youthful age, and old age was conferred upon him, due to which he wasn't too happy. And he actually makes a request to his sons that, please give me your youth, let's trade. You give me your youth, and I give you my old age, because I still need to satisfy my desires. And he goes to, I believe he had 4 sons, and he goes to each of the sons, and each of the sons basically tell him, no, Dad, we need to enjoy as well. And then he goes to the last son, and the last son, Puru, happens to be quite obedient, and he says, okay, it's the duty of a son to fulfill the orders of his father. So he does so, and then he he gives his youthful vigor and his age to his father, and his father, King Yayati, then enjoys with his wife for many, many years. And but as a result of that, he is not satisfied. And in the next chapter, he is actually expressing some sort of lamentation, or he's remorseful of what had actually happened. That what did he ask for? And then he narrates, he makes up a fictional story of a he goat and a she goat, and he tells it to his wife Devayani that what I was pursuing, the gist of the story, that what he was pursuing was so insignificant, and somehow or the other he fell into this trap of illusion, thinking himself to be, the enjoyer of, the opposite sex. And he then basically laments, and then in those he offers beautiful prayers of glorification of the Lord, and then at the end he achieves liberation, and his wife follows him too. So King Yayati is in one sense condemned, or he's condemning himself for what he's actually asked for. Similarly, we see the story of King Pururava, same in the ninth canto. In the ninth canto, it's quite interesting. When you look at the chapter titles, it'll somehow or the other, King Sudyumna becomes a woman, King Yayati regains his youth, King Pururava enchanted by Urvasi. You look at it like, oh, what is happening in each of these chapters? King Pururava similarly is enchanted by a heavenly damsel named Urvashi, who's residing in the court of Indra, but due to some circumstance, she's asked to come to this planet, and then King Pururava is enchanted by her, and then she abandons him because she has to go back to the heavenly planets, and then later on, because King Pururava is in such state of lamentation, he prays to Vishnu. Actually, it's said at the start of Treta Yuga, then he performs this fire sacrifice. And one may think, okay, what is he asking Vishnu? He's asking Vishnu for a benediction by which he'll be transferred to the same planet that Urvashi is staying. And again, he goes to the planet, ninth canto. There's no further description of it in the ninth canto, but then it's repeated again in the 11th canto, in a chapter called Aila Gita. Then another name for Pururava is Aila. So he basically says, he laments for what he has done, and then later on he achieves the lotus feet of the Lord, or through his constant perseverance in devotional service, he attains that. So again, King Pururava, King Yayati, their stories are condemned, but here we see the story of Kardama Muni and Siddhas, who are perfected beings, are actually glorifying him. Just if we go back to verse 7 of this chapter, where after Kardama Muni has seen, is revealing his heart to Devahuti, and I'll read this verse again, and there is a little quiz time here for those that actually remember what was described there. He tells, I have achieved the blessings of the Lord in discharging my own religious life of austerity, meditation, and Krishna consciousness. Although you have not experienced these achievements which are free from fear and lamentation, I shall offer them all to you because you engaged in my service. Now just look at them. I am giving you the transcendental vision to see how they are. So in this verse, in this purport, what is Kardama Muni attributing his gratitude to? What is he grateful to the Lord for? If anyone remembers, what is he? He's grateful to the Lord for bestowing the virtue of fearlessness. In the 16th chapter of the Gita, the very first verse, how does the chapter begin? Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Abhayam Sattva Samsuddhir. Abhayam, fearlessness. Sattva Samsuddhi, purification of one existence. So I'll read that translation of that verse, 16 chapter, verse number 1. Fearlessness, purification of one's existence, cultivation of spiritual knowledge, charity, self-control, performance of sacrifice, study of the Vedas, austerity, simplicity, non-violence, truthfulness, freedom from anger, renunciation, tranquility, aversion to fault finding, compassion for all living entities, freedom from covetousness, gentleness, modesty, steady determination, vigor, forgiveness, fortitude, cleanliness, and freedom from envy, and from the passion for honor. These transcendental qualities, O son of Bharata, belong to godly men endowed with divine nature. So, Kardama Muni is grateful to the Lord for blessing him with this virtue of fearlessness. Fearlessness doesn't mean I just go out of the street now and I just go in front of the bus and, Hare Krishna, I'm fearless. It doesn't. It means to have a purpose bigger than what our fears are. Just this past weekend, Chaitanya Charan Prabhu was speaking at a festival, and someone asked him a question that where Lord Chaitanya says one should be lower than the straw in the street, devoid of all sense of false prestige. In such a humble state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. And this devotee that was asking him, he said that I find it a bit hard to conceive of that vision. And how are we meant to, obviously there is, at times we are told to discriminate between certain types of association. And Prabhu gave a very interesting answer. He said, for those personalities that have transcendental vision, obviously we see in this first verse of the 16th chapter, these are certain qualities that we can see to the degree that they have them. For those personalities, obviously, as Lord Chaitanya is explaining, their frame of reference is actually, humility for them is, their point of reference is the Supreme Lord. Obviously, Lord Chaitanya is the Supreme Lord, but he's playing the part of a devotee. But their frame of reference is the Supreme Lord, Krishna, who's actually so, the Lord is so merciful on me. The Lord is so kind to me. And despite of me having no such qualifications, the Lord is accepting my service. So they're filled with that gratitude that the Lord is so, even though the Lord is unlimited, the Lord doesn't, is Atmaram, self-sufficient, yet somehow or the other, the Lord is seeing something good in me and is engaging me in their service. But at the same time, you see those same personalities when they're actually presenting or when they're actually glorifying the Lord or they're actually speaking on subject matters of Krishna consciousness, they are actually quite firm in their determination. So Prabhu was saying that that's for those personalities. For us, humility is that we don't let anything come in the way of our purpose. So whatever is our purpose, we stay fixed on that purpose and we basically try to avoid anything that comes in that way. Vivastatmaka buddhir ekahu kurunandana. Famous verse in chapter 2, verse number 41. Those who are firm in their determination are resolute. They're those that are one-pointed determination. So similarly, we see here Kardama Muni. His plan is commensurate with the Lord's plan, and he's actually, and you'll see this, in the following verses, that as soon as the purpose is done, he actually returns to his hermitage and he's getting ready to leave. Now, in this verse, there is a description here how it's described Kardama Muni was sexually stimulated. And naturally, when we read this, we may think, oh, okay, what's happening here? I was listening to a class by the Holiness Romapad Swami on this verse, series of verses that he gave. And how do we understand this? Or how do we at least see, okay, this is, obviously we see that's Kardama Muni, he's, what's going to come forth, the progeny that's going to come forth is the Lord himself. And obviously even prior to this, he's performed some very severe austerities. He's pleased the Lord's given him darshan and given him the blessings. And obviously it's Devahuti, who herself is going to be the mother of the Supreme Lord. So Maharaj was saying, he was giving a perspective and he was narrating a pastime. Once Srila Prabhupada was in Hyderabad, and in that pandal, or some sort of a group gathering, one, I believe a European gentleman came up to him and said, Srila Prabhupada, this Bhagavad Gita that you're speaking will solve all of the problems of this world. And Prabhupada said, "No, that's very nice. Can you elaborate?" He said, if one listens to this Bhagavad Gita, people will be peaceful. There'll be no anger. The moment he said there'll be no anger, Prabhupada said, what's wrong with anger? And his eyes just, expanded like, what is wrong with anger? And he said, anger is bad. This European gentleman said, anger is bad. And Prabhupada again became very, started roaring like a lion. He's like, Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita to make Arjuna angry. His service was that at that time, there was a service needed, and the service was of protection. And as a Kshatriya, he's meant to fight. And for fighting, one has to become angry. Just 2 days ago, when Ganesh Prabhu was speaking, he was saying, you don't go in a fight and just look at it, hey, what's happening? Let's have a fight. That's how you arouse that fighting spirit within you. You have to be angry. So for that purpose, Arjuna was being incited by Krishna to become angry. Because that service required that mental fortitude of being angry. Once I remember a few recently, or some time ago, one Maharaj who's very, who's renowned and for his superlative outreach activities all over the world, and when we were speaking to him, he just said, I envision that in every city of the world there'll be Krishna conscious nightclubs. We all were like, Krishna conscious nightclubs? Yes, Krishna conscious nightclubs. And for those nightclubs, you need to have an ambience that resembles a nightclub. But in our Krishna conscious nightclubs, what we serve is actually prasadam, and the prasadam also has to be cooked in such a way that it'll, people will forget the taste of what they eat outside. They'll forget the taste of the drink they have outside. So we have to, for a certain service, there's a certain ambience, there's a certain mood, or there's a certain you can say, a subtle environment that needs to be created. So for us, it's, so we understand that, at least this is one perspective that Robert Maharaj was describing, which said that we understand that this is the service that's been given to Kardama Muni, and he's doing it under the instruction of his spiritual master, Lord Brahma. And we'll see later on, Lord Brahma comes to or in the following chapter, Lord Brahma is very pleased with Kardama Muni, and he says, you've heeded to my instructions, and I'm very pleased with you. So similarly, even with Arjuna, now we can blame Arjuna wrongly. We can blame Krishna wrongly for inciting the anger in Arjuna. And we can also blame Arjuna for it. However, there's a service that's required, and for that service, one has to take on, to that particular mood. Now, what does it mean for us? Right? Because obviously this is Kardama Muni, we are not meant to imitate, at least, such personalities in this extent, but what does it mean for us? And a lot of times, even in our own services, for example, when we go out in book distribution, there has to be some passion. We want to, we want to give out this knowledge to everyone. So there has to be some passion. So a lot of times, once I remember, there's a pastime of Srila Prabhupada in which Srila Prabhupada was interacting with the disciple, and it turns out to be that Prabhupada got so angry with this disciple that this disciple had to go out of the room not on their feet but to crawl back on their legs because they were just so, Prabhupada was like, it literally seemed like Prabhupada was throwing thunderbolts at this devotee. later on it came to be known that this devotee was engaged in some activities which was so abominable that Prabhupada had to speak so strongly. And the very next minute, some other devotee came in, and Prabhupada was as soft as a rose. So Prabhupada was displaying anger, but he wasn't controlled by anger. A lot of times with us, we display certain, you know, we are under the modes of nature, so we'll display certain, we may display anger, but from that anger, we quite often are actually controlled by it, because the after effects of anger is bewilderment of memory. We lose our intelligence. We just, it's just a downward spiral for us. So even in our services, so what we see in this service that Kardama Muni is actually doing is that Kardama Muni was offering that aspect of his service in Krishna's service through the linking process of bhakti. Now for us, because we are Karma Mishra Bhaktas, we perform mixed devotional service, so at least it is helpful for us to understand that, now we may even perform devotional service and say we're doing it for Krishna, but quite often at times, it's because it's mixed, we may tend to be affected by it. Last year, I remember during our Bhadra campaign, after the campaign was over, there was we had a small ceremony to acknowledge those that received the Bhagavatam sets and those that also sponsored, to thank them and also to encourage them in whatever way we could to continue on with the service and to take this distribution of Bhagavatam, and also to really make Bhagavatam the center of their lives. A lot of times when people take the Bhagavatam home, it's actually they're making a declaration that we are here to change, that we want to change our lives. We want the Bhagavatam to be that instrument that will help us get closer to Krishna. So anyway, we were having the ceremony, and that time Ganesham Prabhu was mentioning, and he brought up a point which I believe it was told to him by some devotee, but the point that he was making was, it had such a deep effect, at least for the people there and for myself. He was saying when we are engaged in cultivation, and he was, because 4 or 5 of us were devotees that somehow or the other engaged in the service of cultivating others, and he said when we are engaged in the service of cultivation, somehow or the other there'll be times when we may think, oh, it's us who are doing it all, that it's due to our efforts and our perseverance that this person is actually taken Krishna consciousness. And he said the moment we have this desire in our heart, we should come in front of Radha Gopinath and tell Radha Gopinath, these are your devotees. These are actually people that you have somehow or the other placed under our care. So please guide them, and to whatever extent, please allow us to be instruments of your mercy. And he said the moment we do that, if we don't do that, then in due course of time, we'll just feel dragged down by the weight of responsibility that's been placed on us. So we should always, somehow or the other, even if we can't do much, we just come in front of Radha Gopinath and tell them, my dear Lord, I remember one book distributor, each time he would distribute a book, I believe it was a Bhagavatam set, for each Bhagavatam set that they would distribute, they would come after the day was over, come in front of the Lord and offer their names, to the Lord, and said, please, this is a person who was by some good fortune and by your mercy that they've received a Bhagavatam set. Please bless them so that they make advancement in the Krishna consciousness. So offering it to the Lord. So mentally, and by words, by our deeds, but the least we can do is always come in front of Radha Gopinath and say, Radha Gopinath, this is for your pleasure. So we see Kardama Muni again here, whatever he's doing, whatever him and Devahuti, you see their service is engaged in the pleasure of the Lord. So for us to, like I said, because we are, at least for myself, in that platform of performing mixed devotional service, it's very easy to be carried away, but whenever we, as much as we can, we should always come and offer it to the Lord. In that way, that protection is always there. And that's basically being in the 16th chapter of the Gita, from the verse that I just described, where it describes fearlessness. Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport, one must be fully convinced that Krishna, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in his localized aspect as Paramatma, is always within, that he's seeing everything, and he always knows what one intends to do. So personalities like Kardama Muni and Devahuti, they are on that platform. So they'll act in a way that's basically commensurate with the Lord's plan. So just some thoughts here on this verse. Like I said, we can read this verse and we may feel, oh, what's happening here? But at the same time, we need to understand the broader context. And obviously see that their acts are driven by a purpose. And that purpose is, especially as it's described in this verse, to create good progeny for the good of universal affairs. Especially because they're being praised by Siddhas. Siddhas are perfected beings. So the Siddhas are perfected beings, Kadama Muni is a perfected being. So they're appreciating what's taking place. Okay, I've finished. I think I've gone time. If anyone had maybe one question, comment. Yes, Marjorie. Yeah. Yep. He could have just beget. Mm-hmm. Create. Yep. To bring forth. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. See, this will come in the later verses, but I mean, it's not that big of a surprise here. But you'll see there'll be 9 daughters that will come forth from him, and all those 9 daughters will be given to the 9 sages. And then those 9 and then after that, when he's leaving, Devahuti would, want him to stay because she wanted a son. And then he says, "Oh, the son will appear in due course of time." So that's at least from what I understand that the purpose is that now seeing him enjoy, obviously we would think, okay, he'll just stop or as such. But I think His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, maybe it was because I could hear Kamsari asking him the question. I think it was in Sydney somewhere where he was saying that how do we understand that Kadama Muni is enjoying? We see his enjoyment or something like that. He was, because I'd looked it up under Prabhu's website and it said, and he said that again, we need to see the full context and the full scope of what's happening here. And in the 7th chapter of the Gita, because our definition of material and spiritual, sometimes we can just oversimplify it. This is material, this is spiritual. Because we're seeing it from the lens of a material activity. And, so he said that, and I think 2 weeks ago when Prabhu gave this class, he said that this is the material world and this is the spiritual world. And then that's where we are. But the whole gamut of, this is actually, it is all driven by a purpose. And they're all, they're being dictated by the Lord's plan. And the way I would answer it, maybe someone else can offer a different perspective, is that the Lord's plan was to bring forth 9 daughters before a son. For example, even you'll see with Kamsa and Devaki, Krishna was the 8th child, but year after year after year they have a child. So so Krishna is arranging this pastime in such a way that it's, we may think, okay, this is what the Lord's instruction is, now this is how it will manifest. But the Lord's plans are, once I remember one Maharaj telling, I think it was Ritadvaja Maharaj, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, and he said that you have your plan, I have my plan, And Krishna has his plan, and Krishna's plan is always perfect. So, in the bigger scope of things, this is how things did manifest. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Grantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Ida Go Premanandi, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki.